I just like wanted to ask you right off the bat, like your politics is like pretty left of center, and like you, I don't know if you identify as a social. I think you identify as a socialist. So, as a comedian, how has it been with your politics?
Well, I don't even know like what words mean anymore, because Joe Biden could convince you the way he talks about certain policies that he's he's a socialist in certain regards. So
Hmm.
I certainly am pretty far left. So socialism definitely resonates with me. I think people should be given the things they need, the basic necessities of life, whether it's education, housing, food. People should not want for these things. So yeah, I don't know what words mean and what labels mean. I don't even know what the textbook definition of socialist would be, but I might even be left of that. I don't know. Uh,
Hmm.
but to your question, politics have definitely impacted the trajectory of my career. Not by design, not by any particular calculation on my part. It was more the things that presented themselves, opportunities, situations, and by opportunities I mean opportunities for organizing, whether it
Hmm.
was in the New York comedy community, organizing the New York Comedians Coalition, or in the larger sense with Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, the various movements, Fight for 15 that I've participated in over the last decade. So I would say, I've been a comedian for about 27 years, and the first maybe 8 to 10 of those, I don't know that I really overtly was thinking politically. Certainly not too much of it came into my act, but I think my ideals were more or less the same. But it became more kind of cogent in terms of my worldview after the organizing that I mentioned.
Right. And like, where was this? Was this in New York City at the time, or were you based somewhere else?
Yeah, I've been in New York the whole time. I started my career in New York, and then except for a couple of periods where I moved out to LA. I shouldn't even say move, just went out to LA for pilot season for 4 or 5 month period, whatever it was, just attempting to win the lottery. Uh, yeah, but New York was always my hub, and stand up was really always my hub, my
Hmm.
core. All of those other kind of peripheral things really did feel in a lot of ways more like the lottery, or things that were out of my control, let's say, as opposed to stand up. I always felt like I had a measure of control over.
Especially after COVID, like it'll be a good way for you to contrast what your life was like before COVID lockdown and all of that happened, and how has that impacted the industry, and like what is your life compared to how it was before everything got locked down.
Well, it couldn't really be. It could not be a greater impact than it has been. In that I haven't worked in a year. It's basically been a year
Hmm.
since I've been on a stage. So other than the occasional Zoom show that I've done, like just less than 10, um, and obviously my podcast I do weekly. But as far as performing stand up in a room full of people, it's been about a year. So that's a stark difference, as is the schedule of near constant travel, if not every week. Certainly maybe 2 or 3 weeks a year.
Hmm.
I was getting on a plane, and I was opening for Jim Gaffigan, so we would go all over the world. Really, I mean, even in recent years, we were in Turkey and Greece. Yeah, so we've been everywhere, but primarily in the States. But it coincided with becoming a father as well. So
Hmm.
the pandemic, in that regard, has been a blessing in terms of I've been home for the first year of my son's life,
Hmm.
where I don't think that would have been a possibility, or even entered my mind as a possibility otherwise.
Mm.
So yeah, that's been great. And in some sense, I feel as though it's been almost an admonishment of our priorities as a society, and certainly I'll speak personally. It feels like a bit of an admonishment. Like, why weren't we prioritizing time at home, time with family? We so prioritize work and earning money, things that are certainly necessary and have their place. But it does feel as though a bit of a recalibration. And hopefully that continues. You never know, like, will things just everybody hit the ground running and back to the carnival.
Mm.
But I hope that some of the lessons do resonate, and also, that we value the time with one another, the interactions, the friendships, or even the daily people that you cross paths with.
Right, if at all, right? Like a lot of people are more isolated than ever, and even going out, like the number of places that we arbitrarily went out to, like the number of, like how every visit is like becoming very calculated. Like you're almost like everything becomes a plan and a project now. Going grocery shopping is a project, whereas before you just like went about your day and then you picked up groceries on the way back or something like that. So I've seen coverage on the Independent and TMZ, and they all seem to be like almost trying to guess if you are really upset, and if you really mean this $1 million that you're asking. What's the story like? Is it like a big stunt, or like do you really mean it?
Well, I woke up on what happened to be Super Bowl Sunday to just a deluge of messages from people telling me that Saturday Night Live had done a sketch based on one of my jokes. I do a joke about Zillow being the way that my wife and I sexed one another. And, probably most people know the sketch by now. And that kind of, their sketch went viral, and a lot was written about it, how it was the best sketch in years, the best commercial parody in years. So yeah, I got all these messages, and so I was somewhat bemused at first, and I wasn't sure how to approach it, but in talking with my wife and sort of assessing the options, I decided, to have a bit of a spectacle and to go over the top with, my demand, because it almost calls attention to the fact of, like, what can you do
Mm.
really against a corporate behemoth like Saturday Night Live? What are your options, shy of, if you have like unlimited resources and you are litigious by nature, which I am not. You can throw money and time and psychic energy towards battling one of the biggest shows on this comedic institution that does have unlimited resources. Or you can make an outrageous demand for $1 million, which was also a nod towards the Mike Myers character of Dr. Evil in the Austin Powers movies, and that character I think is famously based on Lorne Michaels,
Right.
Dr. Evil. So I figured, like, that's a fun way to kind of tie it all together, and also to not really tip my hand too much. I mean, I think people know I'm a comedian, and I tend to kind of play it pretty straight. So if some people thought I was serious, fine. But yeah, just kind of adopt the tone of I had a press conference at halftime of the Super Bowl where I addressed it further on Instagram. Just those types of, in a way, it's kind of satirizing the whole culture of the serious tone of people having press conferences, and a lot of the absurdity that goes on. But I was serious about the fact that I had done the joke first. It was on my special 2020. I'd been doing it since 2019 at the Comedy Cellar, which is one of the biggest clubs in the country, if not the world, that a lot of the SNL writers happen to perform at and come through. So so it didn't sit well with me that they were getting all this attention for something that I had done years prior. So at the very least, I did feel somewhat beholden to say, this is a joke that I had been doing, and it's
Right.
on my special. and also call out that SNL does have a history of stealing. So, I felt like kind of taking down the sacred cow of, because there's so many industry secrets, and it's kind of the worst kept secret in comedy that SNL has a history of stealing from comedians and
Right.
from writers. So I felt like, I could accomplish a lot of that while also promoting my own work.
I ask because like this is kind of urban legend, as you're pointing it out. It's like an unspoken, it's like a worst kept secret. Everybody knows this, but like it's not really talked about. And like joke theft is like something that's almost like a thing that keeps people active on message boards online. Basically, what is the extent of this thing, and like how serious is this? Because clearly they are getting a lot of attention for this, right? Like they're getting viewership out of this. Millions of people are watching this, and like they're gonna get rights of all kinds. Their intellectual property wise, this is gonna go down, make a whole bunch of money for them, which probably, I don't know how much you make, but it's probably I would guess not as much as they're gonna make out of it. So in that case, how would
That's a good guess. Yeah.
how do you I mean, like basically then what should be done, even though I kind of want to see this keep going like a stunt, but I'm more interested in like seeing what could be accomplished.
I mean, those are all good questions. I don't know, like to do it in a sustained manner and to do it in a serious manner where you're really going after them, again, requires the desire to kind of see that through over an extended period of time, and to put money into it, put energy and invest a lot of yourself and money into a situation that I don't know how if it would bear fruit or not. Yeah, and also, it's like it's almost a clash of worldviews in a lot of ways. Like I feel as though, there's an honor to, creating something and doing so from a place of integrity and, putting it out in the world. And if somebody steals it or in some way appropriates it or whatever, or even if it is just a coincidence, the person who did it first should be acknowledged and should be acknowledged by the people who basically did the same joke. And so that's where I kind of come from. I don't come from a place of like, I'm not trying to dismantle SNL. It might as well be the Senate or the Congress. It's an institution, it's not going anywhere. And I have no desire to get into a lengthy battle. So I've done what I felt I could do, which is speak truth, try to do it in a comedic way, but also keep people guessing a little. Like, is he angry? Is he serious? Is he, So it did have an element of a stunt to it, but it kind of hit in all the ways I wanted it to. Like people picked up on it, people shared it on their social media, people wrote articles about it. And, as a side thing, people were even Venmoing me money. I think I got close to $400 just from people sending me $5, $10 saying like, fuck SNL, we're with you. So that was really sweet too,
Yeah, I mean, like you are okay. You are speaking from a point of view where you don't want to get into this for personal reasons, because like it's like you're acknowledging that this is like taking on the Senate, and that's too big an institution to take on.
Yeah, and I'm not. It's not that I'm afraid to speak the truth about it. I think I've been pretty clear about what my feeling is. So it's not a fear of speaking the truth or being calculated or careful in my career.
Sure.
I'm being careful about my time and my energy.
If one were to actually try to do something about this, realistically speaking, and I'm asking from the standpoint that like the amount of avenues that you have. And I actually don't know how it works, how you get a show picked up right now, how the kind of farm to table streamlining of comedic content is at all of these, on cable and like on internet platforms. But I kind of want to understand, like as somebody who has seen this industry for 27 years, and seen these people kind of like grow bigger and bigger. Is there any kind of counterweight that could have been developed, or like right now you think there's a counterweight that can develop in the independent front?
Well, I mean, if there is, someone smarter than I would have to predict what it'll be or envision it. For me, I feel as though social media provides the best platform for the truth to rise in some capacity. So I felt as though I utilized those to the best of my ability for my truth to rise, and to, for people to have context of what was really going on, both in my personal situation and with SNL and their history of stealing material. So yeah, those were kind of my goals in calling them out, and I think I achieved them. I don't know that there's any real way for the little person, especially the little person who aspires to that world. That's another thing. I've kind of made a break with show business in that realm. The first, if not half, maybe third of my career, well, maybe half. Yeah, maybe the first half of my career was I was more focused on getting those types of jobs, as I said, like living in LA and auditioning for pilots and writing shows and writing screenplays and having management. But really, I think my involvement in Occupy Wall Street and the movements in recent years really was a line of demarcation for me. And because a lot of that exposed so much about the business that does not sit right with me. So I kind of set out on a path that was outside of a lot of that paradigm, which gives me the freedom to speak. I'm not trying to get a job at SNL. I'm not trying to, get hired. If people hire me, it's because they like my work. They respect me. I've been on plenty of shows of other comedians because they know me from New York. They like me. Yeah. So, that's kind of the road that I have set out for myself. And I find it to be satisfying. And, I've done my own shows. I did a web series, Teacher's Lounge, that I'm proud of, that's on YouTube. So yeah, it's a different path, and it has its own challenges, but also its own rewards.
The way that they did the sketch, the fact that they did it as a sketch and not as stand-up, I feel like that kind of killed the joke, didn't it? Like, I feel like they're more to blame for ruining your joke than for stealing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's up to, that's in the eye of the beholder. Plenty of people expressed that to me, that they thought I did it better, and that made me feel good. I mean, it's almost like the difference between stand-up and sketch in general, like stand-up is one performer who is, kind of going back and forth between laying out the scenario and then becoming a character in the scenario, versus a sketch where they're just, they're acting out the whole thing. I prefer my piece for what it's worth. Yeah, but I did feel as though, even the fact that, and I'm not like a purist about language, but even the fact that they cursed in it, and not only cursed, but bleeped it out, to me, that's more offensive. It's like, if you're going to curse, then curse, like, when the guy was like, oh, it has a guest house or whatever, he's like, oh, fuck, but they bleep out, it's like, if you're going to curse, then curse. Like, don't like bleep like some kind of cutesy thing that you don't even have the conviction of the words you're using. Obviously that's like standards and practices of networks and stuff, but to me, that's almost like a gimmick of like using a curse that you bleep out. You know what I mean?
I see that like sketch comedy on SNL, it's not really as subversive and as edgy as it even used to be anymore. And it's playing to a very kind of audience that loves the repetitious content, like doesn't even want anything new or interesting, just wants to hear what they already kind of believe in, etc. It seems like that. Do you have any intention of like creating anything that's in like the direction of sketch, or like is there anything that can be like a socialist sketch comedy?
Yeah, well, the irony is that I would bet that most sketch artists, maybe not the ones that make it to SNL, because that will change your worldview pretty quickly, but most sketch artists who are just performing for 10 of their friends at, some bar or some theater, are probably socialist or
Hmm.
have socialist leanings. Most artists, people that work in the arts, I would say most people, that's why Bernie had such a strong hold in those demographics and in, people like that. So, a lot of it depends on what your motives are for creating. And like I said earlier, if you come from a place of trying to create something that matters to you and something that is saying something in an interesting way, and maybe something that challenges people in some way, that's interesting to me. But if your motives are, if you're working at Saturday Night Live, and even Lorne Michaels, his motives have changed over 40 years or whatever it's been, 50, probably close to 50. Their motives were very simple and very pure when they started, but they were young, but now they're tied to so many advertisers. They're tied to the film industry and characters that spin off into, like I said, with Austin Powers and Will Ferrell, and it's more of a factory. It's almost like the minor leagues for film. And Lorne Michaels has Broadway, whatever his film company is. He owns all those movies or pieces of them. So your motives change over years, and I'm sure his have as well. So not to judge whatever people's motives are. That's what makes the world go round. But I would think a lot of these young kids that go to SNL, at least when they're starting, they think of themselves as edgy, subversive. They have something to say. But I think you surrender a lot of that when you take a job there.
Right. There are like a lot of, speaking of which, a lot of comedians in New York City are like socialists, and like they declare that. And like I've actually hosted a couple of them. Emmy Blotnick is a writer on Colbert's show, I think, and like
Yeah, she's great.
Aparna Nansharla is also someone who I know is like, I don't know if she's a democratic socialist, but she has done a few shows for like fundraisers for Dem socialist candidates and stuff.
Right.
And there's like a bunch of people who are in these shows. So do you think like there is in these writers' room there's like a kind of conflict going on between, and like have you in your experience seen this kind of conflict where certain kinds of content is like not permissible, and like what kind of content gets that kind of treatment and all of that? Like what's your experience been, and like what stories have you heard about that?
I haven't been in many writers' rooms other than the things that I personally have worked on for myself. And those are more independent, kind of just my own projects with sometimes with my friend Hollis James that I create stuff with. So that's more of a streamlined process. But I think when you take on a corporate job of any kind, you assess pretty quickly like what you can get away with, what you're able to do, and you check certain things at the door after a while when you see that could compromise your ability to earn a living. Some people, it obviously depends on people's circumstances. Some people might walk away if it's not aligning with their philosophy or ideology. But most people, I would say, probably stick around and figure out, all right, what do I have to do to keep this job? I'm still in the arts, I'm still creating, I'm still in a writer's room, so you can kind of justify a lot of things as you go along.
Even when I was growing up in India, I was like a big, majorly into Kevin Smith from the beginning. Loved Clerks and Clerks 2, and like Jay and Silent Bob. I even like New Jersey a little more because of him. So I feel like the way that like he operated, like he was in the middle of the independent film movement. Like there was a bunch of people, what's his name, Steven Soderbergh and like Richard Linklater, and all these people were like making indie movies at that time. And Kevin Smith was like creating this whole universe of like comedians doing like scripts, and like George Carlin was in every single movie of his, I think. I wonder like in recent times, and like in the 2000s we saw this like thing with Judd Apatow and like Seth Rogen and all of these people who became like this unit, and like they were doing whatever the fuck they wanted. And I wonder if like there's anything like that you see forming, or like if there's anything like that that's going on that I'm not aware of, that's like actually subversive and like still has that edgy quality, and like is able to operate with a certain amount of independence. Or do you foresee that happening, especially with the streaming platform kind of monopolies?
Yeah. Well, I would say from my generation, or folks that are around my generation, a lot of comics have just turned to podcasting. So whether it's people like Lee Camp, or Jimmy Dore, people that comedians that are on the left, have kind of created their own thing. They haven't plugged into a corporate type job. They've kind of forged their own path. So I think that's kind of what will have to continue to happen, because I don't foresee the corporations changing, and even like the Kevin Smiths of the world. That was almost like a moment in time where a blue collar, working class kid from New Jersey could shoot something on, like basically like a camcorder, and it gets through somehow. And now it almost seems impenetrable, like that would just probably wind up on YouTube or somewhere where people would have to find it, and maybe the right person would see it, and it just feels as though it's harder for a singular vision to get through now, unless you're properly connected, went to the right schools. A lot of those things kind of facilitate your ascent.
Last thing I want to ask you about your special itself, and like it's great that you bring up the camcorder angle, because like that's kind of the whole idea of working class art, right? Like, because you don't have the same resources, you don't have access to the same kind of materials that the average. So you have like a pretty good podcasting setup, but a person who's like starting out would not be able to start out with the kind of like the rig that you have set up. That kind of like minimalism, that kind of resourcefulness is not something that's being rewarded in the industry. And like you managed to somehow, I think like it's very interesting that you stitch together a bunch of performances, and in a kind of way it is like that, right? Because like when you're going out on all of these like small shows, shorter appearances, you kind of like do parts of your bits of your like special that you're collecting together to make your special anyway. So you kind of like, instead of doing it all together, you just like stitched it together, which is kind of interesting. And it's also interesting to see your beard at different lengths the whole time. And like sometimes, and sometimes like you're doing material from earlier, later, and like later, earlier, and like it's a nice shuffle. And like I do, I read and write poetry books, so it's like it's interesting. Like linearity is like lost in books of poems. So in like comedy also, that's like an interesting observation. So I feel like that, I think it like makes your special work of art, really. I mean, in an age where like the meaning of the word special really like is lost, because everybody has one, and like there really isn't a so-called concept behind most specials, and like you managed to get something like that together. So first of all, what was your thought process behind that? Was it just like pure you being resourceful and like working class about it?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm very flattered by the comparison to poetry, because my older brother Rich is a poet, so that's very near and dear to my heart. Yeah, so I think as you go along in your life, in your career as an artist, you better understand what matters to you, and how to articulate that, and how to move in the directions that compel you, as opposed to working backwards from like, what's going to make me money? What should I be doing? What's everyone else doing? You start to really get a sense of your own, like what animates you, and what excites you. So with Cut Up, that was a case where the pandemic had hit, and this was material that I'd been working on for a number of years, that I was had an eye towards. It was going to be my next special, recorded in a club or a theater, or whatever it would wind up being. But because the pandemic hit, I thought to myself, I have all this material recorded already at the Cellar, at various clubs. It wound up being three clubs that I culled together. My editor, Matthew Weiss, put it together. But we worked in tandem, and I kind of gave him notes. I told him which clips I thought worked best. And yeah, it stands out because, as you say, specials have become so commonplace, and not just specials, but kind of the over the top presentation and packaging of specials, where everyone's killing, everyone gets a standing ovation when they come out, much less at the end. So I like just the nature of these are just sets. The people that were sitting there didn't know they were at my special. They were just there to see a comedy show. So people behave differently when they know they're at a special and there's a warm-up act telling them, let's go, let's get the energy up. When the headliner comes up, that we're shooting a special tonight, and let's really, so the crowd's like, okay, like everybody's just out of their minds. So I do like that this sort of captures more of a night out for people, and just more of here's another set, here's another, performance that I did.
And do you see that, like, your podcast itself, like this setup? I also think about Spalding Gray and like people like that, like who used to like monologue writers. So he used to just like sit in front of an audience and read a monologue out of a book. So I don't know if like the podcast can like revive a certain kind of storytelling that can become a new kind of special, like of a person just sitting at a podcast microphone and doing an act. Do you think you see doing something like that for yourself in the future?
Well, I know that the podcast has value for me in terms of just articulating what's on my mind, at that particular point in time. So it's a weekly podcast as of now. And sometimes I do more, and I'll put the, extra episodes on my Patreon or whatever. But for me, it's just like, what am I interested in? Because otherwise, I wouldn't have the interest in speaking for a half an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it winds up being. Yeah, so it has to be something that matters to me. And that, going back to the special, and I say special in quotes, the stay-at-home comedian. I did that in my living room at the beginning of COVID,
right?
When the pandemic broke out and the world was changing, and everyone was processing in real time, and that as well was kind of cut together by my editor Matthew Weiss, because I thought, maybe this will have value, not all of it obviously, but like let's take the highlights from 2 weeks of these Instagram lives and piece together a comedy special, and in a way it's almost, again, satirizing the pomp and circumstance of what specials have become, and I'm sitting in my living room just talking to a camera. So yeah, that's a muscle that I think is valuable, and that I've kind of developed in recent years, of being comfortable speaking in a room alone and having something to say, and not always having to try to be funny, even just that it matters to me, that it's interesting, that it's things I'm thinking about. And, I always trust that the funny moments will come, and they do. So yeah, it's a different muscle than stand up, but it's gratifying.
What do you perceive as like content that like jokes that are extremely radical according to you? Like, what do you think are radical jokes that you think you can't do in a corporate setting, and like in your experience that you have done them, and like the responses that you've received, if you'd be able to like point out to maybe like a couple of them, if you can think about?
Well, I mean, I've done a lot of jokes over the years that wouldn't fly in a corporate setting. Comedians very often do corporate gigs. We do corporate jobs where like it's a holiday party for a corporation, and they very explicitly lay out what they want you to say or not say in terms of, the tone. So I used to do a joke about war, and I would tie it to abortion, where I would say, war is difficult because we send people over that we care about, people that we love, which is why I think we should ban abortion and then raise those babies as our military. 20 years later, the mother gets a telegram. Remember that abortion you wanted? Done. So that's a joke I would never in a million years do at some corporate holiday party. You have to assess like where you are, and also, like what the job is and what you're being paid, but clearly if I'm in a comedy club, it's no holds barred. I just say what I want to say. And the crowd, I'm not that interested. Again, if it's something that I am excited about, and this is coming from, my core, I'm not that interested in whether the crowd likes it or not. Now that said, if they hate it, I probably won't do it much longer. But yeah, if it hits a tone where, even if it divides the crowd, where half the people hate it, I don't mind. But as long as it sits well with me, that excites me.
Do you think that joke would have come out on SNL?
No, I doubt it. I'd like to see them do that sketch. I'll give them permission, as a matter of fact.